Hi guys, AdderSnake here. How's it all going? Yes, and hello, welcome to Subject Sunday with this week's subject being my gaming history. Now, just something I just want to mention that this isn't going to be a sequential subject that I'm going to be continuing to say from next week. It's going to be something that I'll try and revisit and re-edit so it's actually more professional than probably what today's episode is. But the main episode topic about my gaming history for this week is going to be the Phillips CD-I. Now, there's a bit of a background story behind this. That my father, he's always worked within electrical retail, and that's more being with like televisions, DVD players, things like that. I mean, even gone like say 20, 30 years ago now. And there's one peculiar machine that not a lot of you, I would probably imagine, have heard of is the Philips CD-I, which is probably one of the very first sort of home entertainment consoles. Um, well, I say that's not, it's not necessarily the first. I mean, your Nintendos are probably the first ones, but probably one of the other ones apart from like the main Nintendo and Sega. But Philips CDI, I mean, it was a relatively expensive system to start off with. I would imagine that through staff discount, things like that, you got it relatively cheap, I say. But that's probably the console that I've probably played the most in my younger years. To the extent that because my grandparents also had this console, again, I presume because it probably might have been cheaper than a DVD or a CD player at the time. And so did my auntie and uncle. Um, and because it was just readily available wherever we kind of went, if we ever went to visit, I mean, we usually played quite a lot of these games. So I've got quite a lot of nostalgia for this. Unfortunately, with the CDI console that we do have now, it's still playable, but the problem is got some onboard battery, which is to power the memory, and oh goodness, we're probably talking about kilobits of memory on there, but that battery needs replacing, and it's not a very easy thing to repair. So if we ever to play a game now, we have to do it in one sitting or never turn the console off, or else it will just lose all the save data. But there's quite a few games, and hopefully, for what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them on screen to well, just see what it's all about. So, probably the most nostalgic game that I've got necessarily through the Nintendo, the Philips CDI, is probably Tetris. Now, I mean, everyone knows what Tetris is and what it's all about, but probably what made this game a little bit more special for me, I mean, it was probably one of the first puzzle games that I kind of started where you're trying to, obviously, with Tetris, fit the shapes in place, where they create themselves into four different, they use four blocks to create different shapes, and obviously to create a solid line to create more points. And on this one, I think half of it was probably more to do with the soundtrack that kept me playing it. Because there was 10 individual levels, starting from level 0 to level 9. Level 9 being ridiculously quick with how quick all the shapes actually throw themselves down. Don't know how actually you were supposed to complete that level because the controller wasn't necessarily the best thing to ever use. But I think a lot of it, the soundtrack between all the levels and just sort of the background moving images behind it, just made this a really clever game at the time. And I mean, for the extent of the amount of movement necessary on the screen as well, I mean, it was relatively quite impressive. So sort of starting off as a bit of more of a tangent in regard, that's probably one of the very first shooters I probably played as well, being Dog McCree. Now this is probably what you tell by the name is more of a Western shooter, but it's not like your typical first. Oh yeah, I suppose it is a first-person shooter, but you don't physically see yourself holding the gun. You have a little on-screen indicator that shows you how many sort of rounds you have left in your six-shot Magnum, and you basically need to do like really good target practice. It's very much knowing of a sequence of where you need to shoot and where you and when, um, and something like that. You just have your little reticle on the screen when you move it around. You just have to shoot people. Um, Pretty much being in the middle of a western city. I say western city, western town. And I think your whole objective is to actually try and catch Mad Dog McCree. Probably one of the very first horror games, or something a bit more horror-esque that I've played, is called The Seventh Guest. I say it's more horror. It's a little bit on the sort of horrific side of things, being more sort of like not really like Ghost, but a bit more sort of like I can't explain it, to be perfectly honest. But it's also entwined with a bit of puzzle games as well. So with the seventh guest, hopefully it might be something, because I've actually got it on my computer. I'd like to do a video series of as well. But with the seventh guest, the puzzles are the sort of simple rules, but you have to do it in such a way that it's probably only like sort of 5 or 6 solutions at most. And also some sort of clever puzzles into doing that as well. The very first puzzle actually on the game is where you have to go into the dining room and there is a cake. I think it's like a 5x4, so you have 20 individual pieces. But what you have to do is you have to crate it into. There's probably about 20 individual pieces, but you have to have it with 2 skulls, 2 gravestones, and a blank space. To make each piece necessarily equal, and they all have to be adjacent to each other as well, so you can't have like just random bits picking it off, so they all have to be adjacent is probably not the right word, to be honest. But things like that was one of the puzzles, and probably one of the more difficult, laborious puzzles is imagine like a chessboard. Again, it's sort of 6x4 on a square. There is 4 bishops on each side, and bishops is in the chess playing piece. You have to move them in such a way that you've got to effectively swap over the black and the white bishops on each side. So it's probably about something that takes about, gosh, maybe 250 moves. And plus with just the amount of RAM on the machine as well, it just runs ridiculously slow to try and do something like that. So yeah, so like that, they've got their little inbuilt cheat method where you have to go to the library and use this cheat book to go through it. And probably again, an introduction to more sort of platformer, sort of top-down view game. Is this Dimo's Quest. Now there was actually a PC release of Dimo's Quest, where you actually played it as a frog, but actually on the CD-I you do play it as a boy. And basically the objective of the game, I think there's like 51 levels. You have to collect all the sweets on the level before you can actually leave it. So you have to find absolutely everything, and there's like lots of shooting cars and things like that you have to avoid, and holes in the ground that you can't, like obviously if you walk over it you fall down. I used to remember I used to make him purposely fall down because just the noise he made was hilarious. Sort of torture him that way. And I suppose sort of going back a little bit to the puzzle side of things, there was 2 games that I had quite a certain affinity with as well. There's this game called Merlin's Apprentice, and again, say more puzzle aspect. What's the best way to kind of explain it? Basically, the puzzles you had to complete produced an item. So just for example, I mean, just to complete a puzzle, I think there's one where it's like snowflakes you have to grab, and you've got to grab so many of them you can't miss them, and that produces so many diamonds on the screen. Just that's like ticking boxes just to say, yep, you caught 4 without missing one. And once you do that, say about 20 times, it produces an item saying that you completed that level. And then beyond that, being more Merlin's Apprentice, Merlin being more like a wizard, you have to mix all of these elements together to create a certain item as well, which there is almost one only way to do it. And so like that, I found quite interesting to do, because I like that mental challenge in that regard. Which moves on to the same people making the second game, a little bit more mythical side of things, but they made a game called Labyrinth of Crete. Predominantly doing exactly the same thing, but being more on the mythical aspect. So a lot of their puzzles revolved around the zodiac, so the 12 signs or birth signs. And yeah, it's just, again, similar kind of aspect where there's these puzzles. We never actually finished that game, so I don't actually know what happens, because there's a bit on the side where if you just go through a doorway, you actually come across a minotaur, and it just always scared me. It always used to scare me, and just seeing that, so I did like playing that too much. And kind of beyond that, probably the game that I've enjoyed the most from an interest as a young child, because I was really into like my dinosaurs, was this semi-adventure game called Lost Eden. And with this game, basically, probably the even cooler bit is that the main character was called Prince Adam. And I was thought, oh yeah, I'm Prince Adam. And the idea is that this is a time where there's this guy called Marcus Rex, and he wants to basically eradicate everyone that's necessarily standing in his way, and wanting to basically just destroy the world. Your role as Prince Adam was to try and rebuild citadels in key points around the world, and trying to build up a was it some sort of defense against this guy trying to basically eradicate everything. And so basically they gave you these mythical parts, and the other parts happen, and you had this funny cube, and it kills this Marcus Rex person, which, yeah, spoiler alert, sorry. And probably the other game, I mean, because it's kind of in the heyday a bit more on the Nintendo side of things, was Zelda. There was actually two Zelda games on there. One you actually played as Zelda, which I used to call it Pink Sword Lady, and I think the second one, I think it's called Wand of Gamelon, or Gameleon, and you actually play as Link in that game. And I never truly understood what I was doing half the time in that. So most of the time with that kind of game, I was happy just watching my dad play it. So yeah, I mean, this is kind of at the age where I was about, at most, probably about 5, 6 years old. I was probably the oldest I kind of religiously played it. But those were the main games. I mean, we did manage to, I mean, this machine, you could pirate games relatively easily. We had someone who did a lot of that. Yeah, so we had a few of those games on these discs, and we just had a lot of fun doing so as a family. So this is part one of Subject Sunday for the history of games, or my gaming history, that I've necessarily played. Probably the next one I'll be mentioning for the gaming history will probably be moving on to my Sega Dreamcast and what games I used to play. Oh, no, I did forget. I actually had a Game Boy as well. Might have to mention that. But if you like the video, don't forget to hit the like button, and you haven't subscribed already, make sure you do so. Keep up to date with all the videos that I am uploading, which there's going to be a lot more in the near future. But thanks for watching, and I shall see you all later. Take care.